Don't look now, but the Memphis Grizzlies are once again going streaking. That's count them, 6 in a row for the Grizz. And on Sunday night, they were able to do it without Joe Morant, without Steven Adams, without Brandon Clark. Really good stuff to see from this Grizzlies team. We'll talk about how they got the job done and look ahead to not just the game against the Spurs, but also maybe some trade deadline action here on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies, proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube, like, comment, review, rate, subscribe, all those fun things wherever you get your show on podcasts or wherever you check us out on YouTube. It is much appreciated. Help us continue to grow and develop the show. You will notice that I am again flying solo. We gave you a taste of a mackerel or a smackerel morsel, a piece of the DeMichael and Joe pie to end last week. We are starting this week solo again. I will be joining you here on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. DeMichael will be flying solo for Tuesday's episode, and we hope to close out the week with 3 Joe and DeMichael. We need to come up with a power couple name shows in a row. But I am your host for this episode, Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much, wherever you're taking in the show, for hanging out with me for the next 30 or so minutes, talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball. And we got a lot of fun things to talk about, right? It's nice to have that level of positivity back with this team. Because again, over the Christmas holiday, it was a little bit, touch and go. 1-4 record, including the debacle on Christmas Day against the Golden State Warriors. No Steph Curry, no Andrew Wiggins, and the Warriors were still able to get the job done. But the Memphis Grizzlies have been getting the job done of late. Winners of their last 6 games in a row. That includes Sunday night's contest against the Utah Jazz. Mike Conley and the Utah Jazz still stings a little bit. Still hurts my heart to see Mike Conley not rocking the Beale Street blue. But again, I understand. I get it. I'm just a Grizzlies child of the grit and grind era. You'll have to forgive me for my swooning whenever I see Mike Conley. I'm a big fan of his. But not enough to want the Jazz to win, and I'm glad to see that the Grizzlies were able to get the job done, even without John Morant, who is nursing a thigh injury, even without Steven Adams, who is battling a non-COVID illness. Brandon Clark's still out due to injury himself. So without 3 important rotation pieces, the Grizzlies were still able to get the job done against a Utah Jazz team that has cooled significantly since the season started. They're back toward the end of the play-in picture at this stage. We'll talk more about what that may mean for the trade deadline later on in the show. But they definitely are not who they thought they were, to borrow a line from Denny Green, I believe. Denny Green, the former coach of the Arizona Cardinals. I was impressed watching Desmond Bane. This was the first game since Bane returned from his toe injury that I looked at and I said, yep, start of the season, Desmond Bane is back. 24 points on 18 shots, career high 9 assists with John Morant out. Obviously, that was extremely valuable to see Desmond in that facilitating role, creating offense, not just for himself, but for his teammates. 4 for 7 from beyond the arc. The Memphis Grizzlies continue to have issues in the half court. That's extremely important to understand. I mentioned this over by Substack, written in the dark in my piece today. 23rd on cleaning the glass going into the Jazz game. And half-court offense. That's still about what they were last season. They haven't fixed that issue. And it would look a heck of a lot worse if it wasn't for Desmond Bane and what he brings to the table, not just as a flame-throwing, sharp-shooting, 3-point threat, but now that he's added that dribble penetration to his game, the ability to create off the bounce for himself and for others, that only helps in half-court settings. So if they didn't have Desmond Bane, they'd be even worse in that category. And it's really important to point that out, that Bane is a major cog of what they're trying to do on that end of the floor. So it's good to see him feeling back to normal. It'll be interesting to see if he plays against the Spurs tonight, second game of a back-to-back. Maybe Ja was getting the night off on Sunday, and he'll play Monday when Bane gets another load management because of the toe injury night off. But we'll see when the injury report comes out later today how that looks for Bane, and whatever updates Taylor Jenkins may provide between now and then, of course, the head coach of the Grizzlies. Tyus Jones, once again, reaffirmed why he is the highest paid, or maybe he's not the highest paid, but he's one of the best, and certainly is one of the highest paid, maybe not the guy, but he is well compensated for his backup point guard efforts, and he showed why in this game. Really impressive showing for him. 21 points on 15 shots, 2 for 6 from 3, 6 assists, only 1 turnover, maintaining that elite, or getting back to that elite assist to turnover ratio. That's a major reason why Tyus was having issues early in the year. He was making passes that he wouldn't normally make. Shots obviously weren't falling for the guys that he was playing with, Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, who was struggling early in the year. Certainly not struggling now. He looks very much like a competent NBA rotation player. It's almost like being patient with young players pays dividends. What do you think? Huh? Chill. Leave David Roddy alone. Same thing with Zaire Williams. They're going to be fine. All right? Sorry, tangent. I do believe that you see a lot of positives in Tyus's game coming back. He seems to be finding his footing again, and that's extremely important for this Grizzlies team. Excuse me. So it's good to see Tyus play that way. Dylan Brooks remained his Henry defensive self. Really impressive. His offensive game wasn't the best. 15 points on 18 shots. But you'll take that when it comes to what Dylan brings in terms of effort, energy, defensively. He played 32 minutes, only 3 personal fouls. That's big for him. Jaren Jackson Jr. fouled out late in the contest. Not his most efficient offensive game either. But again, you see continued growth in terms of rebounding from Jaren, which is extremely important. It wasn't just because Steven Adams wasn't there. He has shown the capacity to clean the glass better than he has in recent years. And I think we'll see those numbers continue to back up as he puts more and more of a sample size together coming out of the injury. His stocks are phenomenal. 5 blocks, 3 steals. He has a truly obscene, in the best way possible, over a 10% block percentage. That's easily the best in the NBA. It's not even close. He's just so elite right now in that area of his game. It's really fun to watch him kind of develop and play at that level. And I'm so excited to see what comes next for him as he continues, like I said, a larger sample size. We're getting up there, right? He's played more than 20 games now, I believe. So it's not the smallest of sample sizes. You just want to see it continue to grow and see if he can maintain. He's done pretty well to this point, obviously, and that's really fun to see. I really was impressed with David Roddy in this game, the way that he competed, the way that he found himself in a position to take on tough defensive assignments. He's looking more comfortable. He looks like a guy who could be that 9th or 10th man if they don't decide to make a trade. Like, I don't think they're personally going to make a trade. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. But I like David Roddy in terms of his size, his versatility. He adds more to the team, in my opinion, at this point than like a John Conchar, who, if you're familiar with Locked On Grizzlies, not the biggest Conchar fan. Conchar only took 2 threes in 16 minutes of play. Didn't grab a single rebound, which is rare for John. But in fairness to Conchar, he led the team in plus-minus in this game. Individual game plus-minus is a fool's errand to rate too highly, but he was a plus 12 in this particular contest. Even Xavier Tillman, 9 points, 9 rebounds, and 33 minutes of play, 3 steals. He did some good things. That's someone both DeMichael Cole, my partner here at Locked On Grizzlies, beat writer about the Memphis Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis. He and I both have been hard on X of late. But, Tillman came in, showed that he was capable. You were down 3 rotation guys, 2 starters in Adams and Morant, a key cog in Brandon Clark, one of your top 7 players, 3 of your top 7 players didn't play in this game. And it was against the Jazz team that, again, is decelerating, cooling off, whatever phrase you want to use. The Jazz are not likely to be in the play-in mix, but it's still a good win. Memphis is now 12-10 against the Western Conference. Continuing to rack up those victories is more than important as we continue to look at a West where, the Grizzlies are currently at the top of it along with the Denver Nuggets. But if they went on another losing streak, they could be down around the 5 or 6 seed pretty rapidly. So racking up those wins is vital. Do you think the Memphis Grizzlies need to make a trade? I am on record of saying that I don't think Memphis will do so. But there were 2 candidates in this game mentioning how Utah is likely descending to the lottery mix. Two guys in this game are possible trade targets, maybe, for the Memphis Grizzlies. I talk about each of their value and what they'd bring to Memphis next year on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. It's that time of year. You got to start thinking about these things. And TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do anything other than taxes. You can show your eyes things that are not taxes. You can unpack a moving box that isn't taxes. You can taste things that aren't taxes, sing lullabies that aren't taxes, hope that sleeping through the night happens without taxes. You can grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With the TurboTax 100% expert guarantee, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish so that you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax.com and don't do your taxes. Again, TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. We will talk trade targets from the Utah Jazz next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. Once again, Joe Mullinax here with you, flying solo on this episode. DeMichael Cole will be in the solo hosting duties going into Tuesday's show, and that obviously will hopefully lead to he and I getting back together again towards the middle of the week. In the first segment, I talked about the idea of the Utah Jazz falling back to reality, right? It's like B Rabbit in 8 Mile, snap back to reality. Up there goes gravity, right? Gravity has descended upon the Utah Jazz after their really cool start, wonderful story, but it was always kind of assumed that Utah would not be in the playoff mix. And that's starting to come to fruition. They're very close to being out of the play-in conversation, and they'll probably stay out of the play-in conversation. Excuse me. One of the reasons that is likely to occur is they will almost certainly be more involved in selling at the trade deadline. You know, Mike Conley, beloved Mike Conley. Oh, gosh, Mike Conley. Love that guy. Maybe he gets moved somehow to the Lakers. That's been talked about. Some other team that could use a point guard, the New Orleans Pelicans. I hope not. Hopefully that's really hard for them to do because of cap reasons. But New Orleans could use a point guard. Conley may not be long for the Jazz. You have players like, obviously, Jordan Clarkson, who Grizzlies fans probably are not as happy with right now because of his big side-swiping arm blow that he delivered to the dome piece of Desmond Bane. Flagrant 2, kicked out of the game. He kind of healed it up, to use some wrestling terminology, acting like the bad guy, you know, moving his hands, come on, bring it on, as he left the court in Memphis on Sunday night. So maybe he's not as endearing to Grizzlies fans now. But the Utah Jazz have two players in particular that I think are really interesting in terms of potential trade pieces for the Grizzlies if they were to choose to go that route. I want to stress, I don't think the Grizzlies are going to do that. I really don't. I don't think Memphis is making a trade. You could argue this is the time to do it. Go in, try to be a championship contender. They're technically a championship contender as they are at this moment. But do you go and make that deal? Do you find another rotation piece, a key cog, whatever you want to call it, and try to improve the team in that way? I think they're just going to continue internal development. I think that if they trade up for things, they do it in the NBA draft, all that sort of stuff. I don't see them actually taking a swing and making a deal. But there are two players that played in this game that aren't, unfortunately, named Mike Conley that would be targets. One of them is the aforementioned Jordan Clarkson, who Grizzlies fans are probably annoyed with at this current time. Understandable, right? He took a shot at Desmond Bane. It was not a basketball play. I think that's fair to say. It was very much a, I'm going to just haul off and hit you now play. And that's, of course, not basketball. Football, perhaps, or rugby, but not professional wrestling, absolutely, but not the NBA. That's unfortunate because Jordan Clarkson, as a sixth man on this Grizzlies team, would potentially do wonders for Memphis. He shoots roughly 36%, a little worse than 36% from three this season. He is a microwave type of scorer. He is shooting about 45% from the field overall, which, you know, could be better, but could certainly be worse. There are guys on the Grizzlies shooting worse than that right now. And again, in terms of scoring the basketball, he is very, very good at that. And that is a strength of his. He's also better at getting to the free throw line than he gets credit for. Almost 4 free throws attempted per game. He has 4.5 assists per game. This is all courtesy of Basketball Reference. He is a guy who is more of a 3-level scorer. He can create off the dribble. He can create for others. We just talked about the assists that he dishes out. He is a more complete scoring weapon. And ironically, before him, taking his shot at Bane, I would argue that Clarkson would be the better fit from a basketball standpoint. Now, I also would have said, in fairness to me, and this is good, personality-wise, maybe not quite as clear of a fit in terms of the way that he carries himself on the floor, and that kind of showed itself in the game on Sunday against the Jazz. Any theoretical trade dealings with the Grizzlies and Jordan Clarkson maybe need to just take a break for a little while because of that tension. But it doesn't change the fact that Clarkson can score at the basket, he can score in the mid-range, he can score from three. He provides an offensive punch, and he has a skill set that is not dependent on athleticism, that is not dependent on transition opportunity. It puts him in a spot to be help in the half-court offense, which is where the Grizzlies struggle the most. That's not meant as a knock at Joe Morant, who has basketball skill beyond his elite athleticism. But Ja can't do it alone. Bane can't do it alone. And at some point, at least one of those guys is going to have to come off the court, right? Hopefully, Taylor Jenkins finds ways within his rotation that one of them's on the floor at all times. But it would be nice to have somebody like a Jordan Clarkson, who more so than a Zaire Williams at this point, who more so than John Conchar at any given point on the wing could be a 3-level scorer. So before the scuffle, the brouhaha with the Grizzlies and Clarkson on Sunday night, I would have said between the two options, Clarkson would have been the best pick. Malik Beasley, another piece for the Jazz, is the more likely pick at this stage, not just because of the brouhaha, but because Beasley is a guy who specializes in three-point shooting. He's closer to a 37% three-point shooter, and he is not the creator that Clarkson is, whether it's off the dribble for himself or for others. He only shoots one free throw a game, so that's evidence that he's not particularly accurate or aggressive, I should say, getting to the rim. But he is a three-point marksman, and he's a guy that has been a three-point marksman for much of his career. His current 37% mark before the Jazz Grizzlies game on Sunday, he was a 38.3 for his career from 3-point range. And in the Grizzlies game, he shot 2 for 9 from three. So that number goes down even a little bit worse. But in terms of his career, he's a little bit better than what he's currently showing. And again, the Grizzlies need 3-point shooting. I think they're 29th or so in the NBA in 3-point attempts, 3-point percentage. Pretty much in every 3-point category, they're at or near the bottom of the National Basketball Association. So they continue to need help in that area. Beasley also may be a better fit with the vibes, right? It wasn't Malik Beasley that was getting booed, serenaded with booze, walking off of the court there at FedEx Forum on Sunday night. Not that that matters too much. I think professionals can move on. And, there are guys that were not beloved, Grayson Allen being a good example, that became beloved in Memphis. So I don't know that it completely dooms Jordan Clarkson, but I do think that one of the reasons that the Grizzlies and Zach Kleiman in particular, they haven't made a trade in over almost 3 years. The last time they did it in season was the Justice Winslow trade there in February of 2020, before the pandemic really took off. I think one of the reasons they don't do the deals in season is because they believe in the Grizzlies way, the Grizzlies standard that they've established. They think that there's a type of guy that they want to bring in. And the best way to do that is when they're young through the NBA draft. They'll always trade up in the NBA draft. They almost always will, as long as Zach Kleiman is in charge. We have plenty of evidence to suggest they'll do it as many times as they possibly can. However, that doesn't mean that they won't ever make an in-season trade. Again, the Winslow trade is an example of that, and that was for a guy that they were hopeful could be that wing that helped kind of take them to the next level and could develop alongside Ja and Jarrett. Obviously, that didn't really come to fruition, but they were willing to take that swing, and perhaps they'll do it again. I am of the mind that they will not do it this time around because they're already in a pretty strong place with all the injury issues they've suffered. But if they were to do so, the Utah Jazz are a team to keep an eye on because of their structure, because of the way that they are, again, going down opposite directions. The Jazz are falling closer to the lottery. Memphis is towards the top of the conference. The Jazz are going to probably deal one of, if not both, Beasley and Clarkson. Either of those guys would make sense. I'm curious, which one do you like better? Do you feel that Clarkson would be a better fit than Beasley or vice versa? Maybe drop that in the comments or shoot us a line on YouTube and let us know what you think. We'll talk about Grizzlies Spurs and how that could potentially look here next on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to talk about Built Bar. Built Bar is delicious. And if you have not tried this delicious treat without fat and calories, you got to try Built Bar. We just got through the holidays. My goal is to eat a little healthier this year. I'm guessing it's yours as well. And if you're like me in that way, you don't want to compromise taste. I've got the thing just for you. You got to try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious, you won't think that they're good for you. It's perfect for your New Year's resolution. They are covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. They come in amazing flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. And I'm not sure how they do this, but it tastes like a candy bar while maintaining the amazing healthy idea. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, a whopping 17 grams of protein. And you don't need to wait around for getting a box. You can order your Built Bars at Built.com, but now you can also get them at your local Walmart and Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or even coconut puffs. If you're close enough to Sam's Club, grab a 13-bar box with those hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. You can thank me later. So again, Built Bar, check those out. Big fan of those here at Locked On Grizzlies. We'll talk Grizzlies Spurs next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. It is Joe Mullinax. It is I, your host, your Grizzlies Sherpa for this episode. DeMichael Cole will be leading you on your Grizzlies journey on the next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, where I'm sure he'll be recapping Grizzlies Spurs and looking ahead to what the week holds for Memphis. But before we get to that, we obviously have a Grizzlies Spurs game ahead of us. And one of the interesting things about this Grizzlies Spurs game is going to be the depth chart we mentioned at the start of the show. Desmond Bane hasn't played in a back-to-back since he's returned from his toe injury. Taylor Jenkins has alluded in the past that it wasn't always going to be that way. Will this be the first time that it is not, in fact, that way? I'm not holding my breath. I would not be surprised if Desmond Bane sat out the Spurs game, whereas Joe Morant played, nursing that sore thigh on Sunday. Maybe it's feeling better on Monday. We'll see where Steven Adams is at with his illness. Obviously, Brandon Clark likely to stay out going into the Spurs game. His injury is a little bit less day-to-day than perhaps Ja and Steven are. On the Spurs side, you have Devin Vassell, who the last time the Grizzlies played the Spurs team, that guy can play. He is a very good basketball player, one of the future pieces of the Spurs that is going to help get them back to relevance, perhaps. He's not going to play. He's out for the next several weeks, so they'll be without him, one of their best players. Jakob Poeltl is likely to play. I believe he's probable for Grizzlies Spurs, the big center for them, which will be a fun matchup with Steven Adams if Adams is healthy. Poeltl is one of the better rebounders in the NBA himself. And then Keldon Johnson is questionable for the contest with his injury. So those are 3 pretty important Spurs players. And again, the Spurs are 13-27, not really committed to anything other than trying to be as bad as possible to try to get into the Wemby sweepstakes of the NBA lottery, or maybe even get their Scoot on. Scoot Henderson, I believe, is his name. And then Victor Wembanyama, I always mess up the pronunciation. But the top 2 guys in the upcoming NBA draft look to be pretty good. And San Antonio looks to be in a prime position to snag at least one of their services. So I don't see San Antonio doing much to disrupt that. So what do you look for in a game like this, where Memphis is going to be favored? They should win, and they should win handedly. It's another home and home back-to-back. The last time this happened, it was Pelicans and Kings, so much less sure thing in terms of a Grizzlies win. This should be a Grizzlies win. So what do you look for in a game against a team that, Poeltl, again, really strong rebounder, but he may not play. Keldon Johnson, good scorer, shoots the ball well from 3. May not play. If they do play, they may not be at full strength. You don't know what the Grizzlies are going to look like in terms of their injury report. So what do you want to look for? For me, when I enter these kinds of games, I am looking at how Taylor Jenkins responds in terms of rotation. Similar to what happened in the game against the Jazz, how he used Xavier Tillman as a starter. That's interesting, right? a month or so ago was playing games for the Memphis Hustle. He was getting reps down at the G League. Now he's starting in NBA games for Steven Adams. Brandon Clark was out, and there were other factors to that. But they could have started Santi Aldama. Santi Aldama played in that Grizzlies game against the Jazz. Santi had 17 minutes of play, scored 12 points. He was their best bench scorer. Maybe that was part of his logic, Taylor Jenkins, trying to keep some bench scoring there with Santi. Makes sense. Good choice. But the fact remains, X was an option to be a starter in that spot. How does Jenkins respond when he doesn't have his full allotment of players? And when it's a different group of players? John Morant, obviously Tyus Jones sliding into that role makes sense, but you saw Desmond Bane pick up his facilitation. You had Tillman playing 33 minutes. Only Tyus Jones played more minutes than Xavier Tillman against the Jazz. Who gets those minutes? Kennedy Chandler currently being in that mix. He's that 10th guy at the moment. Do we continue to see him and how he plays in those minutes? It's a chance to get a greater sense of where Memphis thinks they are in terms of depth. Because as I mentioned earlier in the show, I don't see them making a trade. Jordan Clarkson makes a ton of sense to me. Makes a ton of sense. If Tyus Jones, Zaire Williams, Jordan Clarkson and Brandon Clark are your playoff bench, that's fantastic. I think that competes with anybody in the Western Conference and gives you a chance at the NBA Finals from a purely basketball standpoint. Culturally, rotation fit, personality-wise, there's a greater conversation to be had. But Clarkson brings a lot to the table offensively. You can't play he, Bane, and Morant together at the same time very often because there'd be some defensive issues there. But you don't need to. You can play two of those three dudes together alongside Zaire or Dylan Brooks and be able to defend at a high level consistently. That is a good thing to see. And that is a good thing to have in terms of offensive production. But if you are able to play these games and see Zaire Williams continue to develop, you have John Conchar being a willing shooting threat from beyond the arc, which he currently is not. But if he shows signs of growth in that area, it makes a trade less likely. And I do stand by the idea that they want to do their dealings in the NBA draft, where they can bring in guys that they can put into their culture and develop in their own system. They don't have any bad habits because they are Grizzlies guys first and foremost. Tyus Jones, Steven Adams, those guys are the exception to the rule, okay? The starting five of the Memphis Grizzlies: John Morant, drafted by Memphis; Desmond Bane, drafted by Memphis; Jaren Jackson Jr., drafted by Memphis; Dylan Brooks, drafted by Memphis; Santi Aldama, Zaire Williams, David Roddy, John Conchar, not drafted by Memphis, but brought in by Memphis. You're getting the point. They are not necessarily bought into the idea of bringing these guys in from the outside who may not buy into the Memphis Grizzlies way of doing things. The players that are here have helped build that. So I don't know that the Grizzlies want to make a trade unless one of two things are true. Like it was in February of 2020, seeing an opportunity to bring in somebody like Justice Winslow, who could be a future core guy. I don't think Jordan Clarkson is that. Or they truly think that they need help, that they're not getting enough from the Zaire Williams and John Conchar and Santi Aldama type players, and they need to maximize this window of this season. They have done nothing to this point to suggest that they have to do that or that they think they have to do that. So I am leaning towards the understanding that they are going to stay and use these games like the Spurs game to see what they've got. Because if Zaire Williams can't play well against the Jazz, and he did play well against the Jazz, if Santi Aldama can't play well against the Jazz, if going into the Spurs game, you see holes in the Conchar armor, or you don't really think that you have a backup big that can help if Jaren Jackson Jr. is struggling, they will make a move that will not inhibit future moves. They are not of the mind to act like a traditional contending team. So the main thing that I look for from Memphis in games like this one going against the Spurs is how those guys that are going to play, Zaire, Conchar, Aldama, how they react to larger roles if a Bane is out, if Ja is out again, Steven Adams out again. You would assume Jaren Jackson Jr. will play. But in those larger moments, how do they respond? Because that directly correlates to what they see themselves as moving forward. They are at the top of the Western Conference. There are a few teams in the NBA better than the Memphis Grizzlies. They could, in theory, get better, but when do they pull that trigger? I'm not convinced they think the time is now. And if they don't think the time is now, they're not going to rush their timeline for anybody. So it'll be interesting to see how those young guys that will help dictate and make that decision for Memphis, how they respond to those larger roles in a more traditional sense. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen game to game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Next time we are here on Locked On Grizzlies, it'll be DeMichael Cole leading you through the Grizzlies Spurs game, how things go. Maybe some of those younger guys show out and make a trade even less likely. Maybe some of them struggle and, trade deadline rumors start bubbling up again. Maybe everybody forgives Jordan Clarkson and says, hey, bring your 20 points a game over to Memphis. That seems unlikely at this point. But, anything could happen. Lots of crazier things have occurred. So DeMichael will lead you through the next episode, looking at the week ahead for Memphis, and then obviously revisiting the injury report, anything kind of updating wise on that front involving the Grizzlies that he provides very well for you as the beat reporter for the Commercial Appeal. I am your host, your co-host, but if you're host for this episode, Joe Mullinax, thanking you for joining us wherever you're listening, whatever podcast platform, whether you're checking us out on YouTube. You can comment on how nice my haircut is, my beard trim. I'm looking good for 2023 finally. Shout out to me. Feel free to compliment me. I'm big on compliments. Rate, review, subscribe, like, comment, all those fun things. We appreciate you making us a part of your Memphis Grizzlies experience. So again, I'm Joe Mullinax. Until next time, stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. This is Locked On Grizzlies.